Good morning, church. It is Saturday morning, which means it is Testimony Saturday. Last week we heard from Pastor Dennis, and this week I will be sharing. So, for anyone that doesn't know me, I'm Pastor Kaleb. I grew up in Connecticut. I grew up in what I call a Christian-ish home. The Christian morals were there, and I learned some about the Bible, but the relationship wasn't there. We didn't go to church regularly. We went for Christmas and Easter and occasional things like that. And I went whenever I was staying with my grandparents for whatever reason. But I didn't regularly go to church until I was about a junior in high school, and I started going to a Catholic church with a friend. But it was there that I started realizing what I had learned growing up wasn't the same as what was happening here. So I started asking questions. And at this point, I thought I was a believer, but there was just some things that weren't really working and making sense. Eventually, my senior year in high school, I started going to another church, United Church of Christ. But again, it was so different from what I'd known growing up and from that Catholic church that I started asking more and more questions. Now, I didn't start going there because I felt called to go there. I went there because my high school music teacher asked me to sing in his choir. But I started just asking more and more questions. So when I was starting to look at colleges, I applied to Trinity International University, a Christian school, but didn't necessarily intend on going. I wanted to look at it and thought seriously about it because that's where my grandparents wanted me to go. But I didn't really think much of it. I went and visited twice, and I liked the school, but I just didn't feel quite right. So I ended up going to University of Hartford in Connecticut to study audio and computer engineering technologies. And if I'm being truly honest, I went there because I wanted to make money. And I knew I'd make a lot more if I went there. So over the year that I was there, I met a lot of great people. I was inspired by a lot of different professors. I met friends that I'm still friends with today, but it just didn't feel right. It never felt like home. And over the course of the year, I got into more and more trouble. It was nothing major, but it was enough that I knew that I needed to leave. So I left. I transferred to Trinity. I transferred to Trinity because I prayed to God, even though I didn't know if I believed in God, to show me a sign. And I believe He did, and I ended up going to Trinity. It was during my first couple of years there where, again, I thought I was a believer. I'm going to a Christian school, and I'm learning Christian things. I'm doing good in theology classes and all this. I went there to study music ed and ended up in composition and music theory and church music. And I even had a minor in biblical studies, but that relationship wasn't there. But through learning from friends and professors and pastors, most of which didn't know what they were doing necessarily in that way, everyone, I think, thought that I was a believer, I started to understand what that was. And it wasn't until one night, my junior year, that I was walking with Naomi, and it seemed to her like I had a breakdown. She didn't realize till a couple years later what was happening. But I was coming face to face with my sin and realized what it was to be a sinful person in front of a holy God. And it was in that time that I truly came to faith. It was in that moment that I became a believer. After that, studying church music wasn't just about, well, this is a way that I can do music. I find this interesting. This is something I'm good at. It became about serving God. I didn't know until a couple years later what that would end up looking like. But Naomi and I graduated together, moved to Connecticut for a few months, and then ended up down in Texas to continue our study in church music. I went there specifically to study with a professor that we had met at Trinity, and eventually went down to teach at Southwestern, now is teaching somewhere in Kansas. But we felt called to go there because I knew I was called to serve in the church, but it was the only music school within a seminary in a denomination that we agreed with. We weren't Southern Baptists until we actually went there. But through our study there, through being discipled by a variety of professors and a few different pastors, that I felt called into ministry like I am serving now. In fact, my last year there, I applied to a teaching position because I do feel called to teach. It just happens to be in the church and not in a K through 12 school. But when I missed that job, I was one of the last few candidates, but I just wasn't quite right. I started applying to other church jobs throughout the country. I would have bet anything that I would have ended up anywhere except for one place, which is Hawaii. I never really thought that I would end up in Hawaii on a vacation, let alone serving here. I applied to jobs throughout the country, but saw one in Hawaii and thought that I might as well apply and just see what happens. But it was through a lot of different strange coincidences that we ended up coming to Hawaii. And over the past year and 3 months or so, God has done amazing things. God has done amazing things in myself and Naomi and this church. We're seeing amazing things in the denomination, and as we're going through this weird pandemic, we're seeing churches come together in ways that I wouldn't have guessed they would have. We're being able to do things that I wouldn't have expected us being able to do, not just, again, this church, but churches throughout the island. And it's an amazing thing to see. Naomi and I are excited that we're here. We feel called to be here for a while, for a long time. We don't know what God's plans are, but we believe that they're for us to be here. And we're excited to see what He is going to do through us, through Mililani Baptist Church, and through all the believers in the islands of Hawaii. Thank you.